breaking free. Yeah, we're breaking free. No more oppression. It's out for liberty. Breaking free. Yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts. We're reclaiming our land. They try to silence us, but we won't be tamed. Voices getting louder, can't keep us in chains. We got the power, we got the might. Together we can shine, together we can fight. Feel the rhythm in your feet, it's time to stand tall. Raise your voice and shout, we're breaking down the walls. We're breaking free, yeah, we're breaking free. No more oppression, it's out for liberty. Breaking free, yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts, we're reclaiming our land. They try to silence us, but we won't be tamed. Voices getting louder, can't keep us in chains. We got the power, we got the might. Together we can shine, together we can fight. Feel the rhythm in your feet, it's time to stand tall. Raise your voice and shout, we're breaking down the walls. We're breaking free, yeah, we're breaking free. No more oppression, it's out for liberty. Breaking free, yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts, we're reclaiming our land. We're claiming our land, yeah.
How's it going?
It's fantastic, man. This is the last one for the year. Township Liberation, Freedom Uncut, man. This is going to be a good one, though. It's going to describe what we're launching into in 2025 in a big way, both discussion and action.
So let's get this party started here. So tonight we're talking about the rules for new radicals, right?
Okay.
So this is our adaptation of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which was published in the early 70s,
Yeah.
right? Shortly before his death.
Yep.
And so we want to talk about rules for new radicals and how to adapt his rules for modern freedom how to adapt Saul Alinsky's rules for modern freedom advocates, activists, and grassroots movements. So, boy, did I butcher, I think I butchered every word there, but it happens.
But you made it clear, though, ultimately, that's, we focused on the actual.
Not even really sure I got there, but I'm sure that they picked out several of those words and may have seen themselves in there somewhere. But
yes.
So my question going into this episode is, what if the tactics of the most famous community organizer of all time could be reimagined to fight for liberty, localism, self-ownership? We're going to turn Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals upside down and give you a fresh playbook for modern freedom movements. So we're going to go over his 13 rules from our more libertarian, localist, agorist approach. We're going to introduce some new rules for radicals because, I'm so pompous, I feel like I could add to the work of Saul Alinsky. So I'll be bouncing crazy ideas off of Mike like I do every episode. Real world examples of these strategies in action, tools and techniques for modern grassroots activism, and why these rules matter in today's fight for liberty and decentralization.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to do a whole lot of statistics tonight, but I like to hit you with some stats to give you some brain candy of why this stuff is important.
Nice.
70% of Americans believe the government is too powerful and overreaching. And like Mike said, I think we saw that this week.
Yes.
Only 24% of the Americans trust the federal government to do what is right most of the time. Since 2020, you haven't heard this one yet, Mike. Since 2020, over 4,000 local businesses have closed each month while corporate monopolies have thrived.
Of course.
40% of U.S. internet traffic is routed through just 4 big tech companies. Over 85% of media outlets are owned by just 6 corporations. And that's why we have this BS propaganda, mainstream media narratives that we have to deal with all the time.
Yep.
So before we jump into it, 5 reasons why this should be important to you. We want to preserve our freedom, obviously.
Yep.
We're going to teach you tactics to resist government overreach and centralized power. We want you to be able to empower your community, give you tools to build self-reliance and decentralization. We want you to fight back effectively with using good strategies to expose and challenge oppressive systems and those who control us. We want to be able to adapt to modern challenges. Things are rapidly changing, the age of the internet, and with drone surveillance and all the crazy things we have going on. Fresh approaches for digital activism are actually pretty cool, and there's a lot we can do. And I think it's going to give us an advantage that they're not expecting that we will have. So, and we want to secure a prosperous future. We want to promote voluntary free market solutions for lasting liberty. I always say that, I'm kind of starting to see that I'm on the back nine, and it's not so much about me anymore, but it's about my kids and future generations and your kids and, our friends' grandkids and, everybody that's coming up, these young folks that are wowing us on the internet with the crazy cool things they're doing. So let's get ready to reclaim our power, defend our rights, build a freer society, one radical rule change at a time.
Yes.
So,
well said, sir.
Do you want to introduce how you came into the rules for radicals? And
might as well do that. I was actually introduced to the rules for radicals by observing my father in local politics in Irvine, California. He was typically on the conservative slate, trying to vie for the seizing of the council, of the majority of the council seats, back and forth. So even in the 70s, as a very young child, I was observing how his opponents that formed the left-wing slate, largely coming out of the University of California, Irvine, figures like Larry Agran, who is now once again the mayor of Irvine in his 80s, as of the last election. But this tug of war back and forth between what was otherwise sort of a conservative little stretch of real estate in Orange County, California, Irvine, but yet having a strong left-wing influence coming out of the university that was there, that it was essentially the centerpiece of the city of Irvine, at least at that time in the 70s, and then even through the 80s. But Larry Agran and his crew of running their left-wing slate to oppose my father and his right-wing slate were using rules for radicals like a textbook, and it was obvious. I mean, I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, and I could start identifying which rule he was using when I would watch the city council meetings, with my father and his allies and the enemies on the city council. And again, there was always this example demonstrated of rules for radicals. So this is a very real thing in local politics that the leftists were using. It was their playbook. I tend to think that that eventually, when it became supercharged with the support of billionaires like George Soros, rules for radicals then took on a real powerful life, another sort of layer of sophistication and power went into those rules, which were designed originally in Saul Alinsky's vision to be for people who were outside the realm of power, trying to seize the levers of power. But it was meant to be for political outsiders. And in the early 70s and certainly through the 60s, the true leftists, the true, I'd say true socialists and whatnot, were pretty much on the outside. They were not warmly embraced by the Democratic Party, and they were trying to sort of establish their own seat at the table. But they did so, I think, quite successfully. And then when you start adding millions and millions of dollars from sources like George Soros or other figures like that, then it became that much more effective. And we got, in 2008, we got the presidency of Barack Obama. So I think we're in a stage where they're now on the inside, and we who love liberty and treasure individual liberty and the principle of individual liberty and consent of the governed, we're on the outside. So we're the outsiders now, and they're the establishment. And so what do we get to do? We get to challenge them using the same rules that they once used when they were on the outside. Only we're going to do it from a principled position, because their approach, and I learned this again from an early childhood, I learned their approach was simply to seize the levers of power. They were not trying to they weren't trying to be self-sufficient. They're trying to get that power that didn't belong to them and use it for their ends. It's very Tolkien-esque, really. They were trying to use that ring of power for their advantage, to their ends, to their accomplish their goals. So we're going to describe how we can do the same kind of tactics and use the same playbook, but to bury power, not to seize it, as my mentor Richard Body likes to say.
So there's basically 13 rules in there, and I want to go through the 13 rules and how to adapt them for modern times, and particularly for our goals and the lessons we're teaching. So rule number 1 is power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have.
That's right.
This rule emphasizes the perception of power over the actual possession of it. The strategic goal is to make opponents overestimate your influence or capacity, forcing them to react disproportionately. So I wanted to pull up some historical examples. Jump in if you've got any you want to add. But obviously, we're in America. The obvious one is the American Revolution. Right. Colonial militias used guerrilla tactics and propaganda to appear more formidable than they were to British forces. The civil rights movement, nonviolent protests were designed to project moral authority, leveraging public sympathy and media attention. The Cold War is another really good one. Both the U.S. and the USSR exaggerated their nuclear capabilities to maintain deterrence. The labor strikes of the 30s, workers often staged demonstrations that made their movements appear larger and more organized. And then shout out to Anonymous, the hacktivist group, claimed vast technical capabilities to intimidate corporations and governments, despite often not having those capabilities.
Yeah, right.
So some modern tweaks to this rule. Obviously, social media, we talked about it a little bit already. Leverage social media to amplify the appearance of larger movements. You can have a very loud voice with one account or several accounts and get a lot of information out there and a lot of eyeballs. Use decentralized networks to create the illusion of widespread support. Employ, AI generated content to amplify your message. Use data analytics to, react, to predict reactions and be ready to counter them right away. Mm-hmm. And then use non-traditional influencers to propagate messages and recruit allies. Anything you want to add there for a modern tweak of, how to have the perception of power over your enemy when you're doing a grassroots coalition?
I think this is sort of an important discussion to have when we're talking about Saul-Alinsky's rules for radicals, because he was a Machiavellian to the core. He was definitely an ends justify the means kind of guy, and you can read that in the rules. It reads like a modern for 1972 retelling of Machiavelli. It's like Machiavellianism for the out group, right? I think we have to kind of at least recognize that some of the underhanded tactics and the manipulative tactics that are demonstrated in this very first rule are still being used against us, by those in power, right? They got to power using this kind of tactic, and now they're continuing to use this power against the population, to keep the population now in line, to keep those of us on the outside, or keep us regular working folks, normal people, in line. And one of the things that comes to mind is how they, you mentioned it earlier, this sort of uniform narrative that kind of makes it seem like everybody's on the same page, and if you disagree, then you're really going against something. So they're already doing that against us. So I want to explore, short of being fraudulent, every opportunity liberty-minded people have to counter that and to make it appear as if this large group doesn't go along with it. Now, the statistics you read off at the beginning tend to indicate that we don't even have to pretend that. What we need to do is we need to just simply, shine a light on the fact that 70 to 75% of the population doesn't trust the government. That's the net effect of those statistics you were reading. And if we can just bring that to the surface, that alone we can leverage in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's lots of different ways to do that now that the technology is becoming more and more decentralized, and social media is becoming decentralized, and there's much more opportunity to kind of bring that truth out, that there's simply way too many people that are not going along with it anymore. And we do actually have the larger voice. So it's almost as if this isn't such a big challenge. It's just we have to find the method to bring that reality to life, because they're still trying to convince us that we're in a minority when in fact we're the majority. 70 to 75%, based on your statistics, are not going along with the program. So we need to really that would be something that I would want to bring in any way we can think of, bring more and more to the surface, because I think that truth is being very much repressed.
Yeah. So some modern strategies for this would be, coordinating campaigns to make them go viral, to amplify, grassroots messaging, employ guerrilla marketing techniques to make small groups more effective, use cryptography and blockchain to create an air of invincibility. I think the government's very scared of all of that.
That's huge.
And, stage highly visible but resource-light demonstrations that imply broad power and reach.
There's all those are great, but I think the higher level technology, using the blockchain to appear like we have more, maybe more strength and more following. Anything we can do to capture that, because in reality, like I said, your statistics kind of indicate that we actually do have the numbers, we have the people. It's like the ants in is it ant story? I forget what it, but the ants outnumber the grasshoppers 10 million to 1 or some outrageous figure. So we really do outnumber them. And I think that's something that can be demonstrated really effectively using blockchain and modern technology. It's definitely above my technological understanding, but instinctively I know that to be true.
So rule number 2 is never go outside the expertise of your people. Keeping tactics within the skill set of your group prevents confusion and boosts confidence of the group. This ensures actions are effective and morale stays high. So some great examples of this from a historical perspective: the Freedom Riders, these, civil rights activists focused on bus desegregation, and they leveraged their knowledge of local laws to overcome that. Gandhi's Salt March utilized knowledge of British salt laws to challenge colonial and the colonial control effectively.
Yes.
The Vietnamese resistance during the Vietnam War, they leveraged their understanding of local terrain to defeat their much better equipped forces, enemies. And Occupy Wall Street, they used the urban landscape and were one of the first to leverage media savvy techniques and tactics to amplify their messages. And Mothers Against Drunk Driving focused on policy reforms that they became experts in to get their agenda passed. So some modern tweaks to think about when talking about not going outside the expertise of your people. Provide digital literacy training to activists for online campaigns. You can teach people how to use these new tools like AI, for example, to have people be able to do the best they can do. Develop niche expertise. I'm going to be talking about blockchain a lot because I think blockchain is a huge part of this, but develop those niche expertise in things like blockchain or cryptocurrency or decentralized governance, like our friend Mark with direct democracy. Develop those things. Foster collaboration with subject matter experts in the areas you need help in, whether it be technology, law, finance, fundraising. Build smaller modular teams that can tackle specific goals and specialized challenges, and then utilize your local experts for regional action, especially when we're talking about localism.
Right. I think the one that stands out, especially now, for us to pick a big difference between when Saul Alinsky wrote Rule Number 2 and where we are today, is that we actually can collaborate a lot more easily across a variety of subject matter experts. I mean, there's people like in my immediate sphere of influence who are way more technologically deep in their understanding than I am, and always will be. I don't need to be the technology guy. It's like I understand just enough to get to be useful. But when it comes to going deep into technology, I've got people like you mentioned, Mark in New Zealand. I've got friends like Alex Romero, who's also a Southern Californian, who I lean on repeatedly, for anything to do with a technological issue. We have areas of expertise that we can tap into. We don't have to be the guy that does it, but we just need to know the guy that does. So unlike what Saul Alinsky was dealing with in the late 60s and early 70s, where you maybe have something, very compartmentalized group of people, we don't have that. We don't have those. I mean, there's a way to collaborate now that is something that was unheard of when he wrote Rule Number 2 originally and put pen to paper and published that. So I think we have some advantages. But then again, as Saul Alinsky would probably point out, so does your enemy. They have collaborative tools as well. So we have to kind of match them. I think on this scale, we have to think like our enemy does and have a well-oiled team. Everybody specializing, having a very clearly defined division of labor, and a clearly defined. Okay, these are your strengths. These are your strengths. These are your strengths. Let's everybody pitch in where we are strong, and we should be able to pull this off.
Yeah. So some modern strategies is train your group, get used to modern tools and the digital platforms that you need to get your message out there. I think especially important are visual tools, whether they're for making powerful images like what I try to make, or data visualization to get complex data across easily to a large group of people at a glance. We always talk about meeting your audience where they're at. So become knowledgeable about the platforms that your audience is using, whether it's X in our case, I think, and YouTube, or, the younger folks are on TikTok, and then utilize those platforms the way that they're meant to be used and use their best practices. And you'll be able to easily get across messaging and complex issues if you learn how to use those tools effectively. You could build online courses to educate your folks, quickly build expertise, get what you need for your group in the quickest way possible. Crowdsource knowledge for organization and for education and quick problem solving. And then this is one that Mike always talks about, so I try to keep it in mind. Establish mentorship programs to pass down skills effectively and teach, more people in more places, and, get the message out there further.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have methods of collaboration that were inconceivable in the early 70s, right? Or certainly in the 60s. So we should take advantage of that. There can always be one person who knows like how to do the thing in your immediate vicinity, and they can share. Okay, this is how you do the thing. They become the mentor. They become the instructor and the trainer. We absolutely have the ability to do that now, and so does our enemy, right? So does the giant government, giant corporate monstrosities that we're going to be challenging. But we have a leaner and meaner advantage as being outsiders, and that we can operate more organically and without any bureaucracy. So we will always have that advantage being on the outside. So I think we have a lot of strength there and an ability to collaborate that Saul Alinsky would have only dreamed of.
So rule number 3 is whenever possible, go outside the expertise of the enemy.
Yes.
Confusion and overextending your opponent weakens them. So
Yeah.
this rule exploits unfamiliarity, making the enemy react ineffectively or inaccurately. Historical examples being the civil rights movement again. They used sit-ins to provoke untrained responses from law enforcement and made them look really bad and totalitarian. The Zapatista movement leveraged digital communication in a domain that was unfamiliar to traditional Mexican authorities. WikiLeaks, my hero, Julian Assange,
Great example.
they used new technology to release classified documents in a way that overwhelmed the government's ability to control narratives. So they just dumped it all and said, deal with all this while the whole rest of the internet was diving into them and exposing their lies and, their overreach. The Stonewall riots forced police to confront a resistance they were not prepared to handle. And another one is trying to go all over the world here. The Arab Spring, they use social media platforms to evade government censorship and use those to organize their movement. So some modern tweaks for this are exploit gaps in surveillance through encryption and using these tools to remain anonymous, adopt unconventional forms of protest, such as memes or hackathons, and take advantage of bureaucratic red tape to slow enemy responses. What do you think?
Well, I'm reminded a lot of our friend in Scotland, who's asleep by this time, but Stephen McNamara has repeatedly encouraged malicious compliance, where you and they talk about going outside. Okay, particularly you can imagine, UK bureaucracy is legendary, right? It's notoriously thick with bureaucracy. Their legal system is already overburdened because they pride themselves on how well they follow rules and adhere to rules. So what you do is you take advantage of that, and you, as we mentioned, they're registering chickens. They're required to register chickens that they own, and there are all sorts of other really ridiculous things. Malicious compliance simply means things like you just take that to its absurd conclusion. You start registering every possible avian creature that comes across your property, or you invent them, and you just flood the bureaucracy. That's taking things out because again, we're talking about a country and a government that's very used to everybody just sort of complying. So you just turn that on its side. That's a fantastic way to take them out of their area of expertise. Like, well, we weren't anticipating this much compliance. We weren't expecting to have this much do we have to deal with. So you're basically beating the bureaucracy at its own game in that instance. And I think it's a perfect example of Saul Alinsky's rule number 3.
And here's an example, since you brought up the crazy chicken stuff over in the UK.
Yes, hatch revolt.
Yeah, so this is an image I came up with an idea from Mike, and so we were using the tools that we were talking about to make an image, and we wanted to do something that was visually attractive and would challenge people and get attention, and so we sent this out and kind of to start to put the focus on that and get people aware. So this was kind of step 1 when we wanted to talk about what a crazy development that was in the UK.
Yeah, there's hate speech laws all over the world. So there is a certain degree of malicious compliance in their hate speech laws. I remember, Scotland, of course, ahead of the whole of the UK, were the first to really pass, this you can't say mean, nasty, mean words on the internet type of law. And they, you created a whole system where you could report people for their nasty things they say on the internet. Of course, people started immediately started filing complaints against the First Minister of Scotland. And all these government figures, right? We're all targeted by, again, as an attempt. This is malicious compliance. Like we're going to, if you want us to be ratting out our fellow citizens, no, forget that. We're going to rat out the politicians, and we're going to claim they are speaking hate speech, when they say thus and such. So again, malicious compliance, perfect example of a way to fulfill rule number 3.
So some modern strategies for this are to do like what we talked about with Assange, launch these crowdsourced investigations where people dive into the information that's out there or information that's been leaked from a source like WikiLeaks and, expose those hidden truths. We had an example of that yesterday with the continuing resolution, for the funding of the government. People were diving into this 1,500 page document when there was only, 500 Congress people and their teams doing the same, right? And I think we overwhelmed them by how quickly we hit them hard with the things we saw in there that we didn't like. And in a 1,500 page document, it shows that you just need a couple of things to say, what are you guys thinking? Until all these wimpy politicians just back off like the punks they are. And, all of a sudden they say, well, I'm not voting for it. This is way too much heat on me. A no vote hurts me a lot less than a yes vote does. Then also using alternative decentralized platforms like Mastodon to avoid monitoring.
Yes.
Create disruptive technologies to expose vulnerabilities like our friend Mark with Direct Democracy in New Zealand. Implement unpredictable protest methods like flash mobs. And then a great one for social media is to be able to co-opt trends like, the big social media trends and use those to throw your opponents off balance.
Yeah. All good stuff. I think that almost leads directly into rule 4, because without trying to get too far ahead, but there are ways you can do that are call out the hypocrisy of your governing bodies, right? In all the politicians and their own their promises that they never keep and so on. That ties directly into that. So there's a perfect segue really from rule 3 to rule 4, especially with the examples you're giving.
It's almost like you didn't trust that I was going to follow rule 3 with rule 4. They taught that senior year in art school. So I do know that 4 comes after 3. No,
that's true. It does. No, but I mean, you can see how these kind of blend into each other. That was the point I was trying to make, how like one really does lead to another. It's like a flow chart, these rules. But I see a direct, particularly with the modern examples that you're giving, I see a direct correlation from the strategies you suggested to implement rule number 3, just spill directly into rule 4, and that's where it gets really confrontational. I like rule 4. In other words, I think this is a good one.
Yeah, you knew I was kidding, but
yeah.
So in case anybody else doubted I wasn't going to go from rule 3 to rule 4, let me prove the haters wrong here. Rule 4, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. So this rule basically weaponizes the enemy's principles against them, highlighting hypocrisy or forcing impractical responses. Yes. So again, awesome examples from history that we can pull from here. Martin Luther King Jr. obviously invoked the Constitution and religious texts to demand civil rights. I mean, talk about using the 2 big books against people.
Right. Exactly.
Those are the 2 to go to, right? The anti-apartheid movement highlighted South Africa's claims of democracy to expose its racism. Sure. Woz mentioned him. Woz was ahead of me as well. Snowden's revelations. He used U.S. legal and ethical claims to critique the U.S.'s surveillance policies. And then a more one about the big tech issues we're dealing with, whistleblowers in big tech. they pointed out violations of company codes of conduct, and that actually got escalated all the way up to congressional hearings.
Yeah.
So that was a great one. So some ways to tweak this for modern times, get as much data as you can, pull as many documents as you can, and publicize the inconsistencies in these public policies in a public forum. Use AI or machine learning to go through that data and uncover hypocrisies in opponents' actions. Build platforms that document these contradictions systematically, and collaborate with investigative journalists. In my humble opinion, I would do community journalists or independent journalists for the highest impact exposure. Lots of great citizen journalists like our friend Terry out there that are day in, day out, digging through data, going through congressional hearings, all of that stuff to find the problems with government overreach. Right.
I especially, as I said, especially like this rule and the next one too, but 4 and 5 are probably two of my favorites, but I like rule number 4 because the standard that our government from federal down to local is supposed to be following isn't, right. They are blatantly disregarding the Bill of Rights, at least the good parts of the Constitution that it was built after that. They're certainly not following the spirit of the Declaration of Independence or the wonderful thing that launched it all, the wonderful document Common Sense. These are all of the things that supposedly those in government are supposed to be following. They're supposed to be following. These are the rules. Those are supposed to be the rules that they follow. And when we can expose them, and for libertarians, it should be really easy to point out where they fail. We do it all the time. We do it. Most of my X page is probably pointing out what government figures and what government bureaucracies and what government entities have failed miserably to comply with their own rule book. The rule book being the Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights. Heck, the Fourth Amendment alone. There's all sorts of examples of this, and people can complain. And I understand the whole all the Lysander Spooner fans, who the Constitution's unfit to limit government. Well, yes, in a sense, sure, but if we we follow rule number 4, it becomes our way to get them to fail at their own standard they're supposedly presenting. What I especially like is when one side, and this is particularly true, I think, of the Democrats recently, loved to point out how unconstitutional the right is, and the Republicans are unconstitutional. Trump was unconstitutional. Those things, they're not necessarily wrong, but the hypocrisy blows my mind. The hypocrisy is just mind-boggling when you realize how unconstitutional they themselves are. So they are basically competing for who's going to be who is the worst violator of the Constitution, and they're both right. So we end up in a way being able to have a field day with this rule, because none of them hardly we can count on one hand the number of national level politicians that live up to the supposed rules that they're supposed to follow in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution or the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. They don't follow that. None of them do. So we have ample opportunity to wipe them all out by these standards.
So some modern strategies for using this rule are launch campaigns targeting corporate greed and corporate corruption. I mentioned it a little bit that, we're going to reboot BYO boycott in the new year, but that's the idea of BYO boycott is to put information out there about as many corporations and how they're gaming the system through lobbying and things like subsidies to get an unfair advantage over the local businesses that we would prefer to empower and see thrive. And so we'll be talking about BYO boycott again in the new year now that the election's over.
And that's also, by the way, a better approach than just banning stuff. Honestly, but boycotting is better than banning by any stretch, because that's a citizen launched campaign. That's not something that, the government is going to come in and ban this and ban that, setting all kinds of precedent for the government later coming in and banning perfectly healthy things. So we have, as citizens, sort of an obligation to do the banning through boycott, rather than entrusting and once again delegating something about our health to a nanny state.
Yeah, I mean, now that Trump has given RFK Jr. the ability to bring some Democrat nanny state tactics to, banning. He was talking the other day about that there's over 100 different ingredients that are just as bad as, red dye number 40 and yellow dye number 30, or whatever the two they're talking about all the time, that there's 100 more just like it. And, so it sounds like they're going to ban all 100 plus of them. Instead of doing that, the boycott works better than the ban, because corporations try to beat the bans all the time. They'll change, red dye number 40 to red dye number 41. And now they got around the ban, where a boycott will let them know that we're watching them and that we aren't going to put up with their nonsense. So make them police themselves before it becomes a problem, instead of releasing it, poisoning people, and then 10 years later, Congress is like, maybe we'll have a hearing about it. Congress is the slowest moving thing in the world. They say dinosaurs move slowly. Well, all of Congress is dinosaurs, right?
They certainly have the same age. They might as well be dinosaurs, most of them.
Yeah, a lot of these people were around when the dinosaurs went extinct.
Exactly. There's definitely a similar age profile with Congress as the dinosaurs.
So another one. And Terry adds, and when you build your own boycott, you get to choose what's okay with you and what isn't, and go after corporate greed and corporate overreach and this crony capitalist system. We're not anti-capitalism. I'm very pro-capitalism, very pro-free market. But you get, when people are gaming the system and putting our local community businesses, out of business, and reducing our ability to choose whether we want to eat farm fresh food from local sources, or whether we want crap in a box that's been shipped, halfway around the world to get to us. When we lose that choice because of crony capitalism and corporatocracy, then, that's a bad thing, because they have billions to spend on greasing the wheels of this corrupt system, where all we have is our voices and the ability to vote with our dollar.
Right.
Second one is file strategic lawsuits. I know you're a big proponent of this with, local nullification. File strategic lawsuits to enforce overlooked regulations, or to fight back against policies that aren't being followed or being taken advantage of. Promote and crowdsource stories of policy failures to amplify the corruption and contradictions and hypocrisy. Another one that's good for blockchain, use blockchain for transparency and exposing these government lies. And then engage people and communities, especially locally, in tracking real-time actions versus the stated commitments of those in control.
Yes. That reminds me again, once again, our good friend in New Zealand is doing all of this to try to expose the misuse of government funds and tax dollars, to bring that all to light, and to show them, just to show the constituents that their government isn't doing, the town council in this case isn't doing what they claim to be doing, that they're not living up to their own rules, right? Of fiscal responsibility and so forth. Exposing the irresponsibility and out corruption is a huge part of rule number 4.
That's more information if you want to learn more about his project, Direct Democracy in New Zealand. But this will be available worldwide. And he's been on a lot of Mike's Tuesday spaces, which I know are 3 p.m. Eastern and a lot of the folks across the world in the UK that we're working with, they're on there. So it's a really interesting thing to join and just hear their problems are worse than ours, which kind of blows my mind every week.
In many ways. New Zealand kind of righted the ship, and I think it's 10 a.m. the following day in New Zealand when we do the spaces or something like that. Anyway, they're 18 hours ahead. But New Zealand turned a corner, but the UK did turn the corner in an even worse direction. So there's kind of an interesting play there, and of course, Nigeria's government is, because we have a lot of friends who join us from Nigeria. And Nigeria's government is is the envy of Keir Starmer in the UK, as like what they can get away with is monumentally unjust by comparison. There's no restraining the Nigerian government, and so that's why our friends in Nigeria, like, we don't know their real names, nor should we, because they're in even greater danger than our friends in the UK. So there's definitely an interesting scale going on, but again, the cool thing about what Mark is doing is he's going to in real time technologically expose the failure of our governing bodies to live up to their own rules and to live up to their own standards, which they are pretending to follow. That's going to be huge. It's going to be something that all of us can use across the world.
Absolutely. So rule number 5, and I do want to point out here that remember I said there are going to be people talking about my math in the comments there.
Yeah.
2 and 2 is 5. I am going to number 5, Casey. So the joke's on you, mister.
That's right. Perfect timing, Casey. Thank you.
Yeah. And so rule number 5 is ridicule is man's most potent weapon. And absolutely. I kind of feel like I was born for this one.
Yes, you are. Yeah, that's it.
So contrary to what the nuns tried to teach me, ridicule is a powerful tool because it undermines authority and it's nearly impossible to defend against. It demoralizes opponents and rallies supporters by making the opponents, quite frankly, look foolish, right?
Yes.
And so some historical examples, we can go all the way back to Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, where he used satire to mock British policies on poverty. Political cartoons became big in the American Revolution. Ben Franklin was a big one that did this, and they used political cartoons that ridiculed.
Was number 5. Benjamin Franklin was a personification of rule number 5.
Yeah. So the American Revolution used political cartoons that ridiculed King George III, fueling colonial resentment. Charlie Chaplin's another interesting one. He did The Great Dictator, which lampooned Adolf Hitler and fascism. We could probably use Charlie Chaplin nowadays to lampoon some fascism around here. Saturday Night Live. It's gone completely off the rails, but their political skits, at least early on, mocked presidential candidates and
70s to
really
the 80s,
influenced public opinion on things. And now the meme war, that got big in the 2016 election, and that deploys humor to delegitimize opponents and energize bases. You seem like you're chomping at the bit to talk about one of these historical ones. You want to jump in on that?
No, these are all fantastic examples, but if you look at there is unparalleled success behind this rule. It really does work. I mean, I'm thinking like this is maybe a little more of a physical humor, but I'll never forget the people throwing shoes at George W. Bush, a pie in the face of Gates. I mean, people are. I mean, it's ridiculous. We just need to clown these people. And the other kind of cool thing about this that I noticed is that sometimes when sort of people who think of themselves as sort of cool on the left in particular, but they're really not, they try to lampoon people, and it kind of backfires. It makes them look like jerks when they try to follow this rule from a position of power. It backfires. It's called punching down, is what we call it. And I reminisce about how a lot of this rule was attempting to be used against those who were vaccine skeptics, right? There was a lot of ridicule directed against vaccine skeptics. It's like Stephen Colbert and all these people were like, these media figures and doing everything they could to try to shame people and embarrass people into compliance. And it backfired. Ultimately, it's like, no, you're the clown. Like you're the one. So the beauty of it is that those in power, those in a position of power, those that are part of the mainstream can't use this rule. It inevitably backfires. It may convince some people, but the tide will turn against you quickly. So really, rule number 5 is really for people on the out. No one else can really follow or utilize ridicule the way somebody who's an outsider can.
Yeah, so some modern tweaks to this rule is, using viral memes to lampoon government overreach, deploy short form video content on platforms like TikTok. X has that now. YouTube has that as well. Utilize AI generated satire to create hyper targeted ridicule. That's one that I use often. Create satirical content like podcasts, websites, parody accounts that mimic or tease people or mimic the mainstream media, and create ways for users to create their own content in this way, like the meme websites as well. Some modern strategies are launch coordinated meme campaigns to ridicule political hypocrisy, use humor to dismantle complex bureaucratic jargon, use satire to spotlight government problems and corruption and inefficiencies. Like I mentioned, create parody accounts on social media to lampoon public figures or policies, and use humor in all of the things you do, whether it's a protest or a rally or an online event. Use that to make your content that much more engaging.
Absolutely. Anything
Anything you want to throw in there?
No, I think you hit every single one of those examples are good, but to me, memes were designed for this. But there's something about the good old fashioned political cartoon that I think is also worth making a comeback. There certainly is. It's still out there, but somehow I think memes and old school political cartoons are going to come together and reemerge a little bit. Maybe I think I saw some of the animated shorts that sort of lampooned Kamala Harris that were just brilliant, right? There's just plenty of this available. There's no shortage of it. So we are actually pretty well armed to carry out rule number 5. And that's why it's there's no reason not to use every bit of that to our advantage.
Grand Theft America, Biden crime family, to bring more focus. I mean, really, it's amazing how little they talked about the Hunter Biden stuff and the connections to the Ukraine and China and all that. But, they talked about it more now that they've pardoned him. But, there was a grassroots movement to bring that to light. And then this one's for you. I did a series of postcards and, so I made one that's Soviet California and, just to mock their policies. Yeah. And then, we talked about the game show, right? You aren't a real libertarian. We're using humor and satire to teach people pro-liberty, libertarian, freedom-based information and bring about awareness and education in those areas.
Yeah, a little bit of making fun of yourself is healthy too, right? I think there's plenty of things that libertarians should be able to start laughing at ourselves about, and invite other people to also laugh at us too, because we are kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways. These little ego fights that we have over who's the biggest fish in our little pond is really quite funny. It deserves to be. We deserve a little bit of that ridicule pointed back at ourselves. It humanizes us, and I think it actually. I think it actually it's healthy to be able to laugh at yourself, and that's why your game show is brilliant. I think it's just what the Liberty Movement needs.
Rule number 6, and this is a good one as well. A good tactic is one your people enjoy. So effective tactics are sustainable when participants find them enjoyable and rewarding. So this keeps morale high, keeps people engaged, and reduces burnout. So one of the greatest of all time, obviously, the Boston Tea Party. They combined rebellion with theatrical flair. And, I'm sure that was an absolute blast. If I could go anywhere in history, I would have loved to toss some of that stuff in the harbor. What a great one. Sit-ins during the civil rights movement, they offered a sense of solidarity and purpose. And I mean, they're still iconic all these years later as one of the great protests of all time. Greenpeace, whether you like them or not, their direct actions of, going after boats with those little, those little, rafts with the engines on or whatever, that's like got adventure and risk and, just kind of hardcore activism. I mean, it's kind of like the X Games of protesting, right?
Right.
The women's suffrage movement, they had rallies and parades, and they gave participants a sense of belonging and camaraderie. And the Yes Men, they staged pranks to expose corporate malfeasance, blending humor with protest. So some modern tweaks to finding good tactics that your people enjoy is gamify these things. Give props and rewards to people that participate. Another one that's got like that theatrical flair is flash mobs or guerrilla theater for spontaneous action.
Guerrilla theater is actually really, we did that quite a bit. We were trying to pass Prop 215 in California. We did a lot of guerrilla theater in front of sheriff's departments and whatnot. Anybody that spoke out against even the medical use of cannabis, we usually made a point. We got it in the papers. I pleased to say I was the vice president of the Orange County Hemp Council back in the 90s, in addition to being a libertarian activist. And we had a lot of fun with guerrilla theater. And I think those efforts, and they were duplicated up and down the state, helped get Prop 215, the compassionate use of cannabis, passed in 96. I think that was groundbreaking. That was first time anybody had done anything like that. And it's one of the few pieces of legislation I've ever been proud of in California. Naturally, it didn't come from our legislators. It came from people like co-author Steve Cubby and people who were understandably trying to at least get patients off the battlefield of the war on drugs. Like, that was a no-brainer. So we had a lot of fun using guerrilla theater as a tactic to shame the authoritarians, basically.
Yeah, so that's a good one. Glad I threw that in there. I didn't know that story. So another one's social media challenges. That's one that we're trying to do with Build Your Own Boycott. Have it be a way that, challenge people to, do a certain amount of things, or, amplify a message, or whatever you can do to help promote the cause. And then have community building events like festivals or hackathons, anything like that, gives people a sense of belonging and, makes it enjoyable for them to come together and work on the cause.
I'm reminded of the bounce houses that the Freedom Convoy in Canada did when they were occupying Ottawa, literally occupying Ottawa. And, it was a big community event. It was barbecues, it was fun. It's good family fun, having a protest and honking the heck out of the tyrants in Ottawa, namely Justin Castro, who I hear is resigning. I think it's still just unconfirmed rumor, but won't that be great? For sure his replacement won't be much better, but I'm reminded of just how much fun they had, honking their horns and annoying the heck out of the Ottawa bureaucracy.
Oh, here's a question from Zach. How can I reach out to my sheriff to demand that he acts accordingly? Every sheriff department is different. It's kind of funny you mentioned that, Zach, because once I got wind of the fact that the social media laws in the UK, once they were passed, the British police were basically saying that they would seek extradition for us rebellious Yanks
who were posting on British websites anything that didn't comply with their new ridiculous thought police laws, and they're going to try to seek extradition. So I knew that was nonsense, but I actually went and spoke with Sheriff Villanueva, who's the senior sheriff here where I live, in the sheriff's department, and asked if he would ever extradite any Americans to the government of Great Britain. And he said that unless you are a clear and obvious present danger to anybody in the United Kingdom, and you have a established criminal history to that effect, that there would be no extradition whatsoever. And the whole idea, he says, it's absolutely laughable. There's not a law enforcement agency in the United States that would take that seriously. So I just talked to him. I went into the office and said, are you available to talk about this issue? And waited around and actually just spoke to him about it. So Zach, I'd say maybe just knock on the door, see what they're all about. But I think I have a more favorable relationship, I think, with my sheriffs down here, because they failed to comply with any of the nonsense coming from Sacramento, like none of it. None of the gun legislation, none of the COVID or lockdown nonsense. They refused to enforce anything coming from Sacramento. So I have partial respect for I'm still going to be law enforcement skeptical. I'm libertarian, but they did a good job just saying no to the tyranny coming out of Sacramento. I don't think that's the case where you're at, Zach. So I'm not sure if you can that would work in your neck of the woods in Illinois.
I would say that Joe Hanush would say, drive around without a license plate sticker for a little while, and you'll get somebody that knows who the sheriff is to come talk to you.
Yeah, that's true.
So rule number 7, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag.
Yes.
Gotta love the 60s verbiage there. Sustained engagement requires variety and adaptability. Using the same tactic over and over again leads to boredom and reduces engagement and effectiveness. So some historical examples, the Montgomery bus boycott, they sustained it for a year, but they adapted the tactics to continue to keep that momentum. Occupy Wall Street's another one where they lost steam due to a lack of tactical evolution. Anti-Vietnam War protests, they took it up a notch, and they combined marches with teach-ins and huge music festivals like Woodstock.
Some of the best things that happened in music were as a result of protesting the unjust military action in Vietnam.
Gandhi was able to utilize different tactics. He alternated between strikes, marches, and actually, going to the table and negotiating. And then ACT UP, which I think is, it's a shame we've forgotten what a great job that ACT UP did with AIDS activism, because, they were completely ignored and almost, vilified early on, and turned it into something that was huge. And, anybody that was alive back then knows about the activism that they were doing, but they used diverse tactics like die-ins and, different types of protests, and then were eventually able to reach, larger scale media campaigns that still go on to this day, nearly 50 years later. So absolutely great group. Another group that Fauci was terrible with, by the way.
Oh God. Yeah. That was the first taste of Fauci as a villain. And of course, one of the worst things about Americans, other than having Stockholm syndrome far too often, is a really short memory, because same bad guy, the same bad guy during the AIDS epidemic was the bad guy in the manufactured COVID crisis. Just basically serving the interests of big pharma from day one, from back in the 80s. Same guy. And nobody bothered to connect those dots on purpose.
And we kept him for 40 more years and made him the highest paid employee of our government.
Yep.
That's what happens if you just let them run amok. And they've been running amok my entire lifetime. So,
yep.
Hey, Gina's here. Welcome, Gina.
Hey, Gina.
So the modern tweaks that would be helpful with this is, rotate the tactics to regularly maintain, freshness in your approach, incorporate different types of digital media and digital tools to expand your engagement and your reach, use tools like data analytics to measure your results and determine good tactics to use while your protest or outreach or movement is going on. Encourage decentralized leadership so you can plan more dynamically and address things as they come up without having to worry about, going through the proper channels and disseminating information. And then mix online and offline tactics for variety and to sustain engagement. Any of those jump out at you?
Well, the blending of on and offline, I think, again, that's an advantage that we have in 2025 going into 2025 that Sal Alinsky couldn't possibly conceive of in 1972. So I think we're in a real advantageous place because we can do stuff like that to vary our approach and be very dynamic about it, right? And to constantly change it up because we are going to face essentially the same obstacles pretty consistently. We're going to have to go up against the same enemies conceivably pretty consistently. So it is going to be important to switch up our tactics, if for no other reason than to keep the conflict fresh on our side, on the side of liberty, and also conceivably to get the attention we want, to get more eyes on the issue. We can't just keep repeating the same thing over and over. We've got to put a fresh spin on it because God knows our enemies know how to do that. Sort of, they know how to spin. We're going to have to be able to do the same kind of thing. And it also keeps our interest level up.
Some tips here in modern strategies are, alternate between physical protests and online campaigns, introduce new themes or narratives periodically, create different seasons, if you will, of activism, each with a unique focus where what's coming next and that you're going to change gears and you're building to the next stage of what you're doing. And, utilize your community to brainstorm new ideas and crowdsource tactics that will work for maximum exposure and success. So rule number 8, if you're keeping track of like Casey is, that's the one that's after 7 and before 9.
Right.
Rule number 8 is keep the pressure on and never let up. And obviously continuous pressure forces opponents to stay on defense and it prevents them from regrouping or launching counteroffensives. So historical examples being the abolitionist movement, that persistent campaigns that eventually led to the end of slavery, the suffragette movement, sustained protests and hunger strikes until victory, the anti-apartheid movement, international sanctions and protests kept constant pressure on South Africa. The labor movement, they used strikes and different negotiation tactics to apply constant pressure on employers. And any of those jump out at you that you want to comment on?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of this reminds me of the abolitionist movement. A lot of these rules remind me of the abolitionist movement. I almost feel like that. I know the abolitionist movement was kind of captured by the state and turned into an excuse to bring about a bloody civil war. When in reality, if they had just been free to continue their efforts, the abolitionists probably would have seen an end to slavery. It still dragged on far too long, but they would have seen an end to slavery eventually without the bloodshed, because the tactics were working. The tactics of Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison and the North Star, they were working. And they were, again, great examples of a lot of these rules, but they never, the pressure was constant. And the one thing that I think the rule that the abolitionists really manifest very well was one of the earlier ones we mentioned, which is make the enemy live up to their own playbook, their own rules. Because obviously if you apply the Bill of Rights to every individual, then slavery shouldn't exist, right? That was a brilliant, and by extension, the suffragists. You guys have heard me say this multiple times. There's really 3 individual rights revolutions that occurred in the United States. The original one that liberated us from Imperial Britain, and then the individual rights being extended to former slaves, and then allowing a role for women to be participants in the whole of governance. So that's really three individual rights revolutions, right? Because the definition of an individual with rights, a right empowered individual, kind of just expanded over that. But that's just applying the rules, the original Bill of Rights, as it should have been early on, but people just weren't enlightened. They didn't connect those dots. Well, they started to over time. So again, the abolitionist movement is a great example of unrelenting assault on an unjust practice. Nullification played very heavily into the abolitionist movement. So I borrow heavily on that concept for township liberation. Nullification is what eventually would have crushed slavery without the bloodshed. And in my humble opinion, but I think it's a justifiable opinion.
So I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here to see if we can cover more. So the tweaks and strategies are, try to maintain as close to 24/7 digital activism as you can. And, some of the ways to do that are via social media or email newsletters, and those can be automated, and you can use tools to help you do that and keep the pressure out there and keep the message out there. Develop rotating leadership to avoid burnout. And, that's a tactic that can be used with those different seasons where, you have different leaderships taking different parts of the movement over and, having ownership of those, and you have fresh blood and fresh energy to, hit the next point. Then, you can do things like what we're doing with, utilizing live streams and, bringing people in and starting discussions. Obviously, Spaces is another good tool for that. And, use decentralized networks to maintain pressure globally, and also to have the advantage of getting around some of the issues that you might encounter with, allies and countries that have greater censorship or greater monitoring on what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important that to mention that, because one of the things, and I've mentioned this a couple of times before, but one of the things that Amnesty International, when it was a credible organization, particularly in the 80s, pre-internet, would do is get people from other countries to shine the light on injustice in a particular country. Well, that's how you keep the pressure up too. That's why I'm really big on us collaborating with local movements, but internationally, so that it just lends that much more visibility to the injustice that we're opposing, right? Because if we've got eyes on Nigeria from Nigeria and from the UK and from New Zealand and Australia and Canada looking at what's happening in the United States and vice versa, talk about making us appear bigger than we actually are. But in a way, we are that big, right? But it lends to that that notion of visibility, like everybody seeing the injustice from all around the world. It makes it seem like there's a much larger movement, but when in reality it kind of is large, but it's from all over the world. That's very powerful, I think. And it's also important because multiple time zones, multiple eyes all over the world, that gives a sense of relentlessness to that issue, whatever it happens to be. You're always going to have some opposition to it all hours of the day if we have people all around the world calling out that injustice.
So rule number 9, the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself.
Yeah.
So the perception of impending action can actually create more fear and confusion than the actual action does. So some historical examples of this would be the mutually assured destruction of the Cold War. The threat of nuclear war was the thing that actually deterred nuclear war.
Yep.
Civil rights marches. Authorities feared the consequences of brutal crackdowns against these marches. Union strikes are another great example. Employers often concede to completely avoid the work stoppages. Hacker collectives like Anonymous, like we talked about, they threaten data leaks and force hands into the controlling forces into compliance. So some modern tweaks to this would be to use countdown clocks to build anticipation for actions, announce potential leaks or protests without specifying details, develop teaser campaigns to hint at major moves, and then use AI to speculate on scenarios and spread uncertainty. And then some strategies would be to release partial information to create anxiety, use coming soon or teaser campaigns to keep the opponents guessing, use anonymity and anonymous channels to announce action to maximize uncertainty, leak disinformation to confuse and mislead, and create hype videos to promote upcoming protests or releases for your movement.
I am beginning to get comfortable with the idea of using disinformation, because God knows it's used against us.
I didn't know how you'd feel about that one, but
I'm warming up to the idea because it's because they use it against us, right? I'm certain that particularly whenever they don't want us to know about something, but there's something obvious, like there are drones flying around New Jersey and here in Long Beach, California. There's obviously something going on. So the rumor mill gets thrown out there. Some of it is a complete distraction. Some of it's Chinese, it's Iranian. They're looking for nuclear material. Either way, we have drones spying on American citizens. Whether that's the American government doing it, which I think Casey's right, it probably is. Whatever it is, they are using disinformation to cover their tracks. I mean, I think it's fair game. There's nothing wrong with us using disinformation to cover our tracks to an extent, because we also want to lose our integrity either. So it's a fine line and it's a balance. But I'm warming up to that as a particular possible tactic. But it also kind of goes along with what our friend Mark is doing. If you start to expose even some corruption, right, even some misuse of taxpayer funds, how much and certain politicians get embarrassed, I think that becomes then a leverage tool to expose or to kind of threaten to keep others in line, or to, depending on the situation, go in for the kill and replace this hypothetical town council with something else entirely, with something like we're proposing, which he's trying to do in New Zealand, which is simply redirect your tax dollars, your property tax dollars in the case of New Zealand, and essentially counties in much of the United States, to a trust to implement the infrastructure needs of your community, rather than the town, just starve the town council altogether in the ultimate form of tax protest. Just the thought or implication of that might be enough to get them to start complying with us, instead of them always trying to get us to comply with them.
You mentioned Mark's name enough times, and he shows up in the.
There it is.
Welcome, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Appreciate the compliment there. High praise coming from you and the great work you're doing there in New Zealand. So I wanted to talk about the anonymity there for a second, because obviously that's part of my strategy. I maintain as much anonymity as I can. I mean, I'm not even going to pretend like, I can't be found if they want to find me, but it at least takes a weapon away from the opposition. Absolutely. And, when those FAFO turds went after me earlier this year, they were posting, my icon on porn instead of pictures of my kids, like what happened last time. And so anonymity is better than, getting, giving them more tools to go after you. Sure. And they also don't know anything about me, so they don't know what tools I have at my disposal. So I'm probably scarier as an unknown than I would be if you knew all the data on me and what my weaknesses were.
Yeah. I love it. I think there's a lot of solid wisdom there.
So rule number 5, the major premise for tactics is the development of operations that will maintain constant pressure upon the opposition. So this rule emphasizes the need for sustained, relentless action to keep your opponents off balance. So by maintaining this continuous pressure, you prevent them from playing defense, regrouping, planning, or mounting an effective counter defense. So historical examples go back to the OG one in our country, the American Revolution. A series of sustained guerrilla attacks and colonial propaganda kept British forces under constant pressure. The abolitionist movement, which Mike is, been talking about, activists continuously pushed for legislation and societal changes through rallies and petitions and publications. The anti-Vietnam War movement, which, few more war movements later, I mean, they really showed that they were on the right side of history.
Yes.
But the anti-war movement, they used multiple forms of protest, including marches, sit-ins, draft card burning, things that got publicity and sustained pressure on the government. And then the Greenpeace actions again, they regularly executed what were essentially high-profile stunts to pressure these corporations and governments to negotiate with them and see their point of view. So I mentioned using automated tools to schedule these and be able to have consistent, continuous online campaigns, utilizing blending physical protest with digital activism, developing decentralized networks like our friend Mark that we keep bringing up with his direct democracy project, develop decentralized networks to ensure constant activity, and create content pipelines and media pipelines to maintain consistent coverage. So rule number 11, if you push on a negative hard enough, it will push through into its counter side. So this is one I had to kind of play with a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little tricky, isn't it? But
let me hit the first point here. So this rule highlights the transformative potential of intense pressure. By pushing on a negative situation to its extreme, you can force it to reveal contradictions and create that opportunity for change. So again, the civil rights movement, violent responses to peaceful protests exposed the brutality of the controlling forces that were enforcing segregation. The Boston Massacre, British overreach led to widespread support for American independence that people forget did not exist before then.
That's right.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire exposed unsafe labor practices leading to labor reform. Occupy Wall Street highlighted wealth inequality to the point that mainstream media could no longer ignore it. And again, the Arab Spring, government crackdowns intensified protests and ultimately led the regime to fall and a regime change.
Yeah.
Did you want to jump in there, or you want me to hit my?
No. Keep going, because I think that the one thing about this is kind of uncomfortable is because there's a certain element of this rule that kind of says, let yourself be beaten up. I mean, that's kind of what Solinsky is saying. Like you might get beaten up. You might have, and this is not that long after the civil rights movement. You might have dogs bite you. You might have hoses drawn on you. You might get banged up, he's saying that could work to your advantage, or will work to your advantage. So that's why it's like this is a touchy one. Not everybody's willing to go and get beat up for the cause of liberty, or they have some understandable reservations about it. But that's not necessarily what this rule entirely means. But that is a component to it.
So some modern tweaks to it is, it could be used to push back on government overregulation to the point where it backfires. It could be used to amplify corporate misconduct and corruption until the public backlash demands accountability. It could expose surveillance overreach until it forces reform. Um, it could be used to leverage AI parsed data to go through large data libraries to find the data that you need to highlight systemic failures. And, it could be used with blockchain for, documenting these injustices in a transparent way. Some strategies to use with this is to highlight extreme examples of bureaucratic inefficiency, like we did yesterday. Use data visualization to, in a visual way, expose overreach, corruption, inefficiencies, and get attention. Use live streaming to document injustices in real time and bring people into the situation. Try to create viral campaigns that focus on extreme cases of corruption, and use satire to exaggerate the negative and push on it until it flips it for people calling for a change. So rule number 12 is the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. So successful activism requires offering solutions, not just the criticisms.
Right.
So this ensures that the movement is seen as productive rather than just, an unruly mob that's being destructive.
Right.
And the American Revolution obviously did a great job of this. They advocated for a democratic republic as an alternative to British rule. The civil rights movement proposed specific legal reforms like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Labor unions demanded improved working conditions and wage alternatives to exploitation. And the Marriage Equality Campaign advocated for equal marriage rights rather than just protesting the discrimination.
Right. Always with the constructive alternative. Obviously, all of Saul Alinsky's original rules have significance and should be in some way adapted for liberty purposes. My favorites are to stand out, obviously 4 and 5 I mentioned earlier, but 11 is another one of my favorites because as liberty-minded people, we have the alternative, right? It's in a way, whatever this dystopian monstrosity that our federal government and many of our state governments, and even all too many of our local governments, has morphed into, has devolved into. That's the alternative. We are the ones who have the original, the original embodiment of American principles, the principles of individual liberty and consent of the governed. Those are fundamental American principles that have just simply been buried by this monstrosity that the population is allowed to grow and grow over, a century and a half at least, slowly, but now rapidly in the last 4 to 5 years. We have this monstrosity now. I guess really started really turning really dark in the 21st century, making the 20th century, which is already pretty dark, seem even darker. We have the original principles on our side. They're the alternative. They're the dystopian alternative to what was otherwise some really good ideas that needed to be fleshed out and eventually applied, as I said earlier, to every individual. It wasn't originally applied to every individual, the principles that we're talking about. But nowadays, post suffrage and post abolition, it does apply to everybody. Individual rights are now understood to belong to every individual. There's no exceptions to that. And individuals are clearly defined. So we have that going for us. The consent of the governed, which was highlighted in the Declaration of Independence, is something that has been completely, the whole idea of that has been completely lost over time. And they're the ones that lost it. We're the ones that have rediscovered it and are trying to return it to its rightful place at the center of our society, of every free society, or every society that yearns to be free. So we have the alternative because really they're the alternative. We have the original form, the original programming that went into this society and inspired many other countries across the world as well. So that's the best part of rule number 11 is that we have the built-in alternative because essentially they're the aberration. What we have now is the aberration of what was originally intended, and we're just bringing it back and applying it equally as it should have been.
So some tweaks for modern times and tips and strategies are, offer alternative decentralized governance models
Yeah.
as alternatives to federal control and centralization. Sorry, it's getting late here in Florida.
Yeah.
Propose cryptocurrency and blockchain solutions and decentralized finance solutions for financial independence. Shout out to Mike with promote agorist markets as solutions to overregulated economies.
Economics, yes.
Advocate for localism as a solution as opposed to globalist control, and develop peer-to-peer networks as an alternative to centralized systems. So some strategies would be to publish content detailing constructive alternatives to current policies and control, host solution-oriented events like workshops and webinars to educate people and get the word out, develop websites or apps that demonstrate viable alternatives to state systems, use social media to highlight success stories as constructive alternatives, and create visuals such as memes or infographics comparing oppressive policies with freedom-based solutions.
Yes. All of that is like brushing the dust off on American principles. That's again, we have the experiment. We're the people that are bringing back to life the American experiment, right? We're getting it back. We're rebooting it back to the original experiment. All those things you described are different ways we can contrast what we have now with what should have been, and what we can get back to, right? We can get it back on track. We're headed in a pretty good direction for all intents and purposes, right? Not perfect, but we're evolving towards something really good. But in the meantime, before we even gave women the right to vote and participate as individuals in our society, we had 7 years prior to that, of course, the centralized banking, a permanent income tax, all these monstrosities took effect that undermined any advancements that we would ever have in achieving a society rooted in individual liberty. Now there are even worse examples further back in history, but we're bringing it back. That's the beauty of what we get to do now is educate essentially people on our own history and the history of the principles that made America great.
Mark says, good ideas. Thank you. The Waz says we should be using drones to spy on the government.
Oh, yes. I thought about that too.
That.
Oh, Waz is tapping into my imagination. I don't dare share publicly.
Yeah. Well, I worry that this is all that, they want anti-drone capabilities, and that they're going to use this as an example, is a way of getting that done,
Drone wars.
Terry's saying, I'm thinking that 2025, we're having the rebirth of the American rebel. Sounds like fun to me.
Terry, I'm counting on it. That's exactly my mission. Yes, exactly. 2025 will be like 1775 if I have anything to say about it. So 2026 will be an absolute fireworks display if we do 2025 right.
All right. So our last one here is Rule 13. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it.
Yes.
So focusing on a specific individual or entity makes the fight more tangible.
Yes.
Personalizing the target helps rally supporters and forces the opposition to respond defensively. So in the civil rights movement, they targeted figures like Bull Connor, who was the commissioner of Birmingham, and basically demonized him and used that to highlight the systemic racism that they were fighting against. The anti-apartheid movement focused on Nelson Mandela's imprisonment to humanize the cause and put a face to it. Labor movements have identified and exploited CEOs to galvanize worker support. And consumer rights movements have focused on specific companies like Monsanto for unethical
Yes.
practices.
Yes.
So some modern tweaks on this one are focus on local bureaucrats who enforce oppressive policies,
Oh, yes.
personalized campaigns against corporations, target tech CEOs responsible for censorship or data exploitation, highlight government officials who perpetuate government overreach and control, and use digital tools to create multimedia profiles of targets and, broadcast them and spread them far and wide.
Yes.
Some modern strategies, I talk about Julian Assange a lot, and I had the honor of seeing his brother Gabriel Shipton speak before Julian Assange was released recently, and he created a documentary that focused on his brother and got information out even further, and then did a world tour using that as the catalyst for speaking and getting the message out there further. Launch social media blitzes to highlight the failures of whoever your target is and get that information out far and wide. Organize protests at specific locations that are closely associated with your target. Use crowdfunding to support legal challenges against the target. And have to say it because this is one of my preferred weapons of choice. Develop memes that mock the target and personalize the fight against the target.
Goes back to rule number 5. Yes.
So any of those jump out at you?
Well, what I like about this is another one. This was my 4th favorite rule, rule 13, because essentially what we're talking about is fixating your nullification efforts, right? So if I'm the city of Huntington Beach and I'm the city attorney, right, like Gates, I would focus and personalize the target of the state attorney and his sidekick, the governor, Gavin Newsom. That's personalized. Like that's your singular focus when you're doing that type of effort. Your effort is to nullify their nonsense, right? Nullify all of that's coming out of their legislative pens, and especially the parts that are directly challenging, your city that you're in. So that's an example of that kind of focus. But the sort of quasi-private sector, because we don't really have a private sector, do we? And this isn't capitalism. This is, crony capitalism, or better yet, honestly, fascism. But building your own boycott, BYO boycott, does the same kind of thing. Essentially, it's nullification of a multinational corporation, right? It's what a boycott is. It's essentially a form of market nullification or counter economics. So both of those things have a singular focus. So rule number 13 speaks to both nullifying a particular government or bureaucratic entity and also a corporate entity in the case of building your own boycott. So this rule applies to very well to both of those efforts, and I think you do have to have a very singular focus when doing either of those two things, whether it's a governing body or some corporate overreach that you're challenging. I think it's a great rule that fits both of those, and all those suggestions, of course, fit alternately in both of those situations, whether it's a governing body or a corporate body, you're effectively nullifying.
So if you have any questions or final things you want us to go over, please put those in the chat now. As we thought might have happened with this, we did not have time to go over any of my new ideas that I wanted to add to what I think we've proven are 13 great ideas and great rules for people like us that are trying to do grassroots activism, to promote change, to work towards freedom. But just to kind of, throw it out there, some of the ideas that I have that we'll be discussing in part 2 of this are the fragmenting the bureaucracy, nullifying overreach locally, like we talk about all the time, supporting local self-reliance, rejecting forced conformity, boycotting oppressive systems, questioning everything, creating alternative media, embracing privacy tools, leveraging blockchain, supporting local mutual aid networks, acting locally and resisting nationally, uniting on core values. And I've got even more than that. So I got a bunch more that I want to talk about at some point and get further into this. But this has been good.
Yeah, well, this is and that sort of sets the stage for how we're going to launch into 2025 with the Freedom Uncut Township Liberation podcast. Plenty of new rules to come up with and start implementing. And as you have already alluded, there's some they overlap and kind of spill into each other logically. There's a flow chart to these, so I'm excited about kind of ironing all those out. And again, in 2025, starting to take notes. I've a bunch of other examples that I'll mention. Yes, blockchain, let's go. Exactly, Casey. There's just a lot of examples that we're going to have as well to be able to share and ideally inspire more people to do more work and have more examples and more case studies in how to apply all of these rules in our grassroots efforts.
Absolutely. So I told Waz at the end that we would talk about tariffs. What do you think about tariffs, and do you think they're a good idea?
Generally, no. Generally, not a good idea. No matter what anybody how they want to paint it, the consumer is what suffers. But you see, when the country that is imposing tariffs against American producers are hurting their consumers too. So in a way, I feel like there's an opportunity for, this is a perfect opportunity for agorists, really, because like let's just do a count. The way to dodge a tariff is to have the country that is the victim of the tariff and the country that is countering with tariffs of their own. Well, the consumers are the ones that are suffering. Maybe we should circumvent the tariff imposing governments of both countries and work together on the side. Not saying that's something I want to fully advocate, but that certainly provides an opportunity for some agorism to be put into practice. And I'm thinking like whatever country, let's say China, I'm thinking about the Chinese consumers want to be able to get cheaper American goods. American consumers want to get cheaper Chinese goods. Why don't we circumvent our dystopian, both the consumer groups find ways to circumvent that on from both governments. So I think tariffs are generally a bad idea. There may be some specific instances where it makes sense, but it's really rare. And overall, I think it provides an opportunity for consumers in the countries that are imposing and counter-imposing tariffs to maybe find a way to work around their governments. And that part that's the silver lining for me.
Yeah, I would add to that. If you take the narrative about the border, whether you think the border is a problem or not, just take the narrative about the border and realize that they've done nothing about it. Yeah. And so this is something that there's been a huge amount of outrage about and outcry about, and they've done nothing about it. So if you take something like tariffs and say, well, why do they care more about tariffs than they do about the border? Just to juxtapose two things that's going on currently, right. I would say I'd be worried about why they want to control it, who it benefits, and what's the ulterior motive, right? Sure. So there's a lot of circumstances where we find out afterwards, well, the COVID, the vaccine was about pumping money into big pharma less than it was about protecting people and keeping people safe, and all of the things that went around COVID as well. And, so that concerns me, giving up more control and letting the government dictate things.
Yeah. It's still
part of it. Go ahead.
No, it's still a top-down solution, which is never going to be good. I mean, there's nothing coming from the top down that is generally going to be good for the little guy or the guy in the middle. It's always going to be big for the big, almost always. So if there's a policy in place that puts control of something in the hands of a centralized power, whether it's a government, whether it's centralized banking, whatever it is, it's generally not going to be good for the people that it needs to be good for, right? That's not going to be good for us. So there's a danger that's pretty obvious whenever we entrust something from the top, to something to be fixed from the top down. It rarely ever works that way. We really do have to do things from the bottom up.
Yeah, and then so my second point on this would be the government can't pass an audit. They can't put numbers in no, the whole government, right?
Whole government. Pentagon specifically is what comes to mind.
Trillions are lost every year. I mean, you know how much was lost from that COVID money? I mean, it's like, I think the numbers in like the 3 to 4 trillion range, if you believe the actual accounting, which I never believe anything they say, right?
At least understated.
Yeah. So, I mean, they can't pass an audit, which is basically just putting numbers in boxes in a spreadsheet, right? I mean, like, it should be that simple. I mean, obviously at a large scale, but we got money and here's where the money went, in and out, right? Accounts receivable, basically, right? They can't do that. But then they're like, well, but we can absolutely do this complex economic intervention into the free market and force people in other countries to pay for this or pay for that or pay their fair share, or, pressure Canada to do this and pressure Mexico to do that. We can figure out this complex economic thing. An audit, though, I mean, that's beyond our capabilities. The DOD's, failed, 8 in a row under the new system, and, dozens before that. But this complex economic thing, we can do that all day long. And, and as a side note, what irritates me about the internet is all of the people that, from the COVID regime have said, I'm never trusting the government again. And then they say tariffs and they're like, oh, but I'll trust them to do tariffs. Like I'm in lockstep with them that they can pull this off. Right.
Yeah. It's not consistent. Either the top down solution is invariably negative, or you're one of those people that trusts government. And you can't be both, right? You have to either be skeptical, or you have to be, for God's sake, be consistent, right? You're either skeptical of top-down government, or you're not, and you can't compartmentalize like that. But that's how, isn't that how right-left politics has always been? Party politics, the mutual controlled opposition of the two major parties has always been about, well, I trust my people to do the right thing, but I don't trust the other guys to wield the ring of power, or whatever. It's like that. We need to keep those guys from having that kind of power, but my guys can have that kind of power and use it wisely. It's nonsense.
Yeah. Especially in an era where pretty much every piece of economic intervention that they've done has hurt the little guy and screwed up the economy.
Every time.
We brought you inflation. What we're going to do now is we're going to mess with things more with tariffs and just hope it goes well. No. Yeah. The whole problem with a top-down solution is it tends to, without hardly any exception, is going to benefit, as you often hear me say, I learned it from my friend Eric, big for the big. It's going to benefit. It's going to be it's a big government move for the benefit of big business. It's not going to help the little or the small, the middle or the small, I should say. So yeah, I tend to think I tend to be really skeptical of any employment of the use of tariffs. I can see rare circumstances where it might make sense briefly, but on the whole, as a policy, it's just a bad idea. We're at over 2,000 views. Way to go. Thanks for your help too, Waz. Make sure you're subscribing to Waz if you want him to be part of your network and help you grow for sure. Yeah. So Casey and I have been going back and forth about the death penalty, and I'm like what I like to call 100% pro-life. I'm anti-abortion, I'm anti-euthanasia, and I'm also anti-death penalty. And there was a Catholic bishop in Chicago, Cardinal Bernardine, who used to talk about the consistent ethic of life. And to me, it needs to be applied consistently through all of these measures if you're pro-life. And so I don't I don't believe in any sort of execution, even for those that deserve to be executed, multiple times a day, every day. And, but again, to me, it's a trust issue, and so I've been trying to think of different ways. I was trying to tie this back into our topic, but I've been trying to think of different ways to say that in an attention grabbing sort of way. And, one of the ways I previously had said it is, I don't trust the government to deliver my mail. Why would I trust them to do anything else? Right. But the one I said today, I think it was that, I don't trust I don't trust the government with elections. Why would I trust them with executions?
Yeah.
And, so I'm trying to think of different ways of saying, like, yeah, you can come up with circumstances, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, where it's absolutely justified, but I can also come up with dozens and dozens and dozens of other examples of them putting people to death that were innocent, putting people to death that were obviously mentally ill or intellectually challenged. And then I could also point to the racism in executions. So, I mean, I could go so many different ways with that, but really it all boils down to, on both topics, just don't trust the government.
Yeah. I think that's the healthy premise behind anything we're talking about at this point. Plus, I would add that if we really had an unrestricted, as the founding fathers intended, unrestricted and completely uninterfered with right to self-defense, that's all the death penalty a free society should need is a fully functioning right to self-defense that is completely uninfringed by any governing body. In other words, I have the right to defend myself or others using lethal force. That's a death penalty enough in a free society. I would think. There just needs to make sure there's no hindrance of that, which unfortunately we do have that in our society. So that's where it gets a bit muddy, as we have a lot of unconstitutional gun restrictions that would kind of prohibit that, especially depending on the state that you're living in.
Yeah, got some good comments. Zach throwing some love to Terry and Waz. They're very helpful. Absolutely.
Always.
Never trust the government. Leave it to the jury. Yeah, because juries are infallible, right?
Well, I mean, I trust juries. Juries certainly did a great job nullifying the fugitive slave law. So I understand Casey's point.
But yeah, I would take it out of.
But that's the other direction, isn't it? It's like, no, we're not going to enforce your law.
Yeah. I mean, again, you were saying, like, the premise of it, and I would say we have data on all of this. Like, we have data of hundreds of executions where people were probably innocent, over 100 of which have been proven innocent with DNA, since the advent of DNA. So, I mean, we have proof where this has not gone right hundreds of times. And, so to me, it's like, when you have the data, you have a really good reason not to trust them and figure out other ways of doing stuff.
Agreed.
I don't want to go super into death penalty, but Casey's like, Luigi deserves a death penalty. I mean, so then everybody that executes somebody on the street deserves the death penalty, because you can't just say one guy deserves a death penalty because a CEO has, their life is more valuable than a gang member that gets shot in a similar fashion, shot in the back by somebody on the street. Right. I mean, like, that would be some limousine liberal type stuff if you think that their life is more valuable than anyone else's life.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said about keeping people who are guilty alive for the duration of their life, basically keeping them alive to live a long life, and completely to the end of their days in incarceration, and never being free again. There's something kind of torturous about that too. So I don't think life without parole is that great of an alternative either for those that are guilty parties. And I do think, though, it does provide an alternative for those that may be innocent to get the chance to prove their innocence in some way, shape, or form. And you're right, there have been lots of cases where we know innocent people have been put to death through the current government system. I because of that, I share your skepticism.
I guess we'll have to do this sometime because everybody's on me here, eye for an eye. Not everybody believes the Bible, Casey. It's a free society to be religious or not be religious. So we'll do that because I'll take on all comers. I'm a pro-life libertarian. I've argued with the best of them.
I got you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everybody. Thank you again, Mike. This was been
a great year.
Yeah. Oh, here's another one that finally loaded. Real Christians condemn and reject all militarized murder. Like I tried to make that to be shocking and push back on, the religious right that seemed to think bombing the whole world's okay. Tried to, make a message that had that.
Very important. Yeah. It's very much in the spirit of Ron Paul himself. Honestly, that's a meaning he would approve of.
So just one more time, make sure you buy Mike's book. He pointed out it's the perfect size for a stocking. I'm pretty sure.
It's a good
I measured it myself, so you can complain to me if it doesn't fit in your stocking, because it's a great stocking stuffer. Revival of Common Sense, the case for township liberation. And follow Mike at 2FreeMike on X. Follow us. I'm at the top. Basic helps out. Terry. And then Mini Free is my son who does some of our tech work. Make sure you are subscribing to Woz if you are interested in getting help with your X account and learning from the best of the best, and one of the best guys on here and a great friend of mine and somebody I admire. Do that. So something that came up in the comments was I have enough subscribers on my YouTube channel apparently to stream. So between Casey and Woz and Terry, they figured that out on a YouTube account I haven't looked at in a month. So I think Cash helped out with that a lot. So thank you to the Cash army out there that all went out and subscribed. So appreciate you all for doing that. And anything you want to say in closing there?
No, I think it's been, like I said, been a great year. It's a fantastic 8th episode. Great way to close out the year. Looking forward to what we're going to be doing in 2025.
I wanted to throw Mark out there one more time.
Please.
Too.
You guys need to follow Mark and what he's up to, because it's going to empower all of us everywhere, all the liberty-minded people everywhere in the world. This is going to be an amazing year ahead of us. So I can't help but be optimistic once again.
Might as well throw Zach out there too. He's been active in the comments. Casey's been active in the comments. It's the end of the year, man. Spread the love, throw it around.
Yeah.
Some
everybody
really great people with big hearts and working their butts off. Both of them have shows, obviously. And Township Liberation, I didn't throw that one up, so that's up there too. And then last but not least, and number one in our hearts and on our scorecards, Terry here.
Yes.
Make sure you're following the great Terry. And, she's a tireless supporter that does so much. And, I can't even express in words how much I admire her and appreciate her help. So make sure you're following the great Terry.
Please, everybody follow Terry.
And so that is it. And, appreciate everybody coming by. I'm going to queue up the song because I didn't play it. And thanks, everybody. And we'll be back. And Township Liberation will be back after the 1st. And then Saturday, I'm doing something with Cash, and I don't know what time because I'm done after Saturday. So we've got Friday, Saturday, and then I'm giving Terry the rest of the year off. So, well, not the rest of the year. I think we're probably do something between Christmas and New Year's on the game show. So just to have some fun and keep it light. So good night, y'all.
Hey, everybody.